the transition.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see many of you back here this morning. We suspected that the second day would be a little difficult for some of you with jet lag and the excitement of all the sessions yesterday, particularly the last one. Anyway, it's great to see you back. We want to get on as soon as we possibly can. We've got a very interesting day. The highlights are this first session, which we've specifically called a lesson. We really hope there will be a great deal to learn on the subject of data journalism from Paul Steiger and Peter Barron, who will be moderating the session from here. Lunch will be with Jimmy Lai, a great personality who will be speaking somewhat as Wadakanfa did yesterday. We'll do our best to try and make the situation of being able to compare and contrast the hearing with the networking, with the listening, somewhat better than yesterday. This afternoon, there'll be a session specifically on China. We very much hope that you'll all be on that and that will be a crowded and exciting couple of hours. And the last highlight that it's important to mention is the annual general meeting of GEN, which will be held this evening at 5:30? 5:20, 5:30. Members and non-members are welcome. In the spirit of gathering ideas and collaborating, we're very keen that everybody who possibly can be there and be able to help shape the future of the association. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Bertrand, who will be able to give more specific introductions. Thank you once again. Have a good day.
Thank you, Claire. So I'm very pleased to announce this last lesson with Paul Steiger. In fact, I invited Paul last year. GEN was not created. At this period, I was director of the World Editors Forum within WANIFRA. And so Paul was scheduled and he was sick. Finally, he didn't come to Hamburg. So I'm very pleased to have this Skype conversation, Skype lesson, in fact, with him this year. And I hope he will come to Paris, our next destination, our next News World Summit to be held in Paris end of May. Peter Barron from Google will be the moderator of this lesson. So please, Peter, come. And you have the floor, you have the connection, hopefully, with Paul. So up to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much indeed, Bertrand. It's great to be here. Thank you very much. And I must just say I'm very struck, I think, yesterday by the general mood of optimism and forward thinking that we've seen here. And it's not always the case at events such as this. And I must say it's also refreshing that there doesn't appear to be a session called What Should We Do About Google? And I would suggest that perhaps a slightly better question might be, what should we do with Google? Because what we're very keen, the point we're very keen to make is that Google is keen to work closely with news organizations everywhere to increase readership and to increase engagement and to help find more sustainable business models. And we'll be talking a little bit about that later. But a really key area where there are fantastic opportunities, and this is why we're so pleased to have Paul here, is in the area of data journalism. And as we heard yesterday, this is really it's been a great revelation of the digital age. It's really an industry that didn't exist at all until relatively recently. And the opportunities are great. So it's fantastic to have Paul Steiger, who really is a master in the field of pioneering investigative journalism, and with ProPublica has really shaped the agenda in terms of new ways of doing journalism, and famously, of course, became the first non-print publication to win a Pulitzer Prize. So I'm going to hand over to Paul. It's for a brief masterclass in data journalism. Paul will have the floor for 15 or so minutes, and then we'll throw straight to the floor and take questions straight to Paul. So please have your questions ready, hands up, and then we'll throw those over to Paul. Paul, the floor is yours. I hope you can hear us, and I hope we can hear you.
Well, I can hear you fine, Peter, and thank you very much, and thanks also to Bertrand. I was really sorry to be sick at Hamburg and not get there, and I'm missing being with you at Hong Kong, which is one of my favorite cities, but I hope I can be in Paris next year. But in any case, delighted to interact with you on the subject of data journalism and news applications, which have become a huge part of what we do at ProPublica. This is in some sense a surprise in that this emphasis is a significant departure from what I envisioned when we started ProPublica. In fact, it's by far the biggest departure from the original plan. The size of our web development team is more than twice as great as I originally envisioned. And as resources become available, I plan to expand it further. It's been a huge, huge increment to what we do. And this is particularly interesting because it's not like we have set up a separate sort of new non-investigatory arm in data journalism. On the contrary, the data journalism that we do is entirely focused on support for, and in some cases, in fact, often leadership of our investigative reporting. So what I intend to do in my sort of prepared remarks is to talk about some examples of what we've done in the data applications, news applications, data journalism field, and to use that to spark questions and discussions, because I expect to learn from you fully as much as you learn from me. Let me just give you a little bit of context before I do that. Most of you, I think, have some sense of what ProPublica is about, but just let me give you some background, which will be helpful to understand the data journalism and news apps examples that I'm going to talk about. We got started in the beginning of 2008. We are nonprofit, nonpartisan. There are 32 journalists, plus another 7 or 8 support staff, and anywhere from 2 to 5 interns at any one time. Nearly all of us are in New York. Our goal is to shine a spotlight on abuse of power and failure to uphold the public interest. We, I mean, obviously spend a lot of time looking at business and government because that's where a lot of the power is, but we also look at the justice system, at unions, at education, at healthcare, anywhere where there's power, there's potential for us to do a story. Everything we produce goes on our website. The biggest stories, those with the greatest potential, we normally give free to other news organizations that we choose as partners because we think their platforms are best for a particular story to give it the audience that is likely to produce the greatest impact. Sometimes those are very large news organizations. Our very first partner in June of 2008 was 60 Minutes, the biggest news platform, at least that I know of, in the US. But our second was a small mid-sized city newspaper, the Albany Times-Union, which happens to be in the capital of New York State. And the story we were doing, while it was a national story, was focused on some state action. And in fact, the story appeared on the front page of the Albany Times-Union, and by the middle of the day, the governor had completely turned around and changed his position on a key issue. So it's not just size, but the positioning of a news partner that provides the impact. In our nearly 4 years of existence, 3.5 years of publishing, we have had more than 80 partners, nearly all the biggest names in legacy media and in new media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Denver Post, the Texas and Florida papers, nearly all the big and most of the mid-sized newspapers and their websites we've partnered with, plus many magazines and all the major TV networks, cable, news websites like the Huffington Post, Slate, Salon, Politico, Yahoo, etc. Our most recent new partner is the Financial Times. We're very happy to do that. Our goal is impact. That's what makes us different from traditional news organizations. We don't lobby. We use only journalistic techniques. And we measure ourselves by the impact that we have. So with this as a background, let's talk about data journalism and news apps and how they're enhancing what we can do. And I think the one example that is best really to show this is something that we call dollars for docs, or dollars for doctors, more formally. It is what this project did, which it started in the fall of last year when our reporters, two senior Pulitzer Prize winning reporters, were trying to see if they could scrape data from the websites of 8 pharmaceutical companies. I'm sorry, it was 7 then, it's since become 8. And these are about 1/3 of the pharmaceutical industry in the US. And because of settlement of lawsuits in recent years, they had been required to disclose information about the money that they pay to doctors, to physicians in the US, to promote their drugs, in essence, to run seminars and other programs telling doctors about their experience with the drugs and how best to use them, creative additional ways to use the drugs that the doctors may not have thought of. And this is all legal, but it raises obvious ethical questions if you're getting paid by a pharmaceutical company to promote their products. Is this a good use of the doctor's time, good use of his reputation or her reputation, and so on? So our reporters sought to pull the data down, but what they discovered was that it was not easy because, surprise, surprise, the companies were not eager to make it easy, and they used various techniques to make the data difficult to assimilate. Things like, in some cases, using the doctor's first name, in other cases, using initials, in some cases, using the last name first, in other cases, using the last name last, and various other techniques to make it difficult to pull the data down. But as it happened, these two veteran reporters were passing by one of our young data journalists, a young man in his 20s who is both a journalist and a programmer. And he heard them say that they were about to give up about scraping the data, that it was impossible. And he said, wait a minute, who says it's impossible? And so, well, let us tell you. And they went down the elevator together, came back with some sandwiches, and started talking about it. And to make a long story short, after a couple of months of all working together, they produced the data app, which we call Dollars for Docs, where you can type in the name of any physician, And if the physician received any money from any of these drug companies, his or her name will appear along with a list of the sums received from each of the companies, and next to each of the companies, a list of the drugs or the major drugs that they produce. So if you're a patient, for example, you can, sitting in the waiting room, type this into your iPhone and find out if the doctor is getting any of this money, if so, how much, and what drugs the doctor might be pitching to you as a result of this. Obviously, this you can instantly see the value of this for producing a story, and our journalists were able to produce some blockbuster stories showing, for example, that some doctors who were on the faculties of major medical schools, where the medical schools had a policy against doing this, they were, unbeknownst to the dean, actually doing it. And the dean saw our story and said, "Whoa, wait a minute, we've got to have some we've got to have some change here." But what we found very quickly is that, in addition to the stories we did ourselves, when we made the database available not just to the general public but to other news organizations, they could, by entering in the zip codes, the postal codes that mattered to them, they could pull down a subset of doctors that mattered to their audiences. So newspapers, TV stations, bloggers around the country began doing stories on their own, focusing on groups of doctors that are in their circulation or readership or viewing areas, and very much taking the story from an abstract national policy issue where readers and viewers can tend to tune out, saying, well, what can I do about this? This is way beyond me, to have it be a local matter, a doctor that they might know, or a hospital that they might know, or doctors that friends of theirs might know. And so the result is to transform the story into something that had value and importance as a national story, to something that penetrated multiple corners of the country. I mean, there have been dozens of major separate stories done by other news organizations all around the U.S. And we found this same process to work with other data journalism that we've done, some on the huge $800 billion economic stimulus program, some on the performance of elementary and secondary schools around the country and providing educational opportunities for poor students, and some which is going to be a major project for us continuing into 2012, which, as you know, is a major election in the U.S. This will be on election geography and redistricting. Some people ask, how can you replicate this this capacity that we've developed? And my answer is three things: people, people, and people. Really, Scott Klein, our brilliant director of online development, has recruited a team of 4 of these crackerjack young journalists who have both engineering and journalistic skills. And he says, only half joking, that his ideal candidate is someone who quits a computer science major in his senior year and switches to English because he's bored. They're not all like that, but the combination of the the two instincts and the two capacities are very, very important. I can't tell you how excited I am about the potential for this. I'd like to throw it open to your questions and comments now, and I'll try to respond.
Terrific. Thank you very much indeed for that, Paul. Okay, who's got a question for Paul? Please wait until the microphone comes to you, and then he will be able to hear you. Gentleman here.
My name is Bambang Harimurti. I'm from Tempo, from Indonesia. I applaud your work, which is what journalism should be all about. But it seemed to me the commercial media has economical problem to do the job you are doing. So how do you finance your endeavor? Thank you.
We're supported primarily by philanthropy. And you're right, our status as a nonprofit makes it easier for us to do this. If I produced Dollars for Docs when I was editing the Wall Street Journal, for example, the app would belong to the stockholders, and the ability to just make it willy-nilly available to the general public and to other news organizations would be more limited. But I think that we are seeing for-profit news organizations develop data apps like this, and there are others that are inhabiting the nonprofit space like us that are expanding. And I think it will become a major weapon for both nonprofit and for-profit news organizations.
Next question. Gentleman here, at the back. Oh, no, he's just looking for a piece of paper. Somebody else? Sylvie.
Good morning. This is Sylvie Kaufmann of Le Monde. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
It's great to see you here. Can you tell us a little bit about how you set up your newsroom and what is the composition of it? How did you introduce the skills for, in particular, for data journalism into this newsroom?
A very good question. The initial notion I had was that we would have a broad range of backgrounds. I really could have filled the room with 40-year-old Pulitzer Prize winners on the nature of the business at the time we launched in 2008. Just as the financial collapse was occurring, and as the news business, as you know, is going through terrible turmoil. I mean, we had at the start, we had 17 reporter openings, and I think we had 1,400 resumes right when we walked in the door. So that the opportunity to hire was wide open. But I wanted a range of ages and a range of experiences. And my notion was that we could have the more experienced people transmit the skills and ethical culture of investigative reporting forward to the younger folks, and that way we would be extending these skill sets across the generations. And that indeed has happened. But the far more interesting and important impact is the reverse. That is, the younger journalists had this kind of digital DNA, and they have transmitted all kinds of skill sets to their more experienced colleagues. And initially, we had a very small web team. I mean, I knew from the beginning that the website would be our core base interface with the world, that our biggest stories, as I mentioned before, would be given to larger major news platforms, but that everything we did would go up on a website. So we had Scott Klein, and we had initially a couple of people to work with him. But Scott was the one who, once our website was working and in the process of improving the website, began to see opportunities to exploit the skill sets of the young engineering journalists that he brought on board. And so we started adding whenever we could, first through the freelance route, but then through the full-time employee route, so that now we have, with a 4-person team working with Scott, we have real firepower that makes it possible to combine traditional reporting skills with database generation.
And you mentioned earlier the perfect combination of computer science majors who switch to English. Is there a ready supply of such people? I mean, are these easy people to find? It doesn't seem that there's many of them around like that.
All I can tell you is that Scott is 4 for 4. Each time we had an opening, he mustered up 3 or 4 candidates, and we would have hired all of his finalists if we could have afforded it. So that it is possible. I'm not going to let him reveal his deepest trade secrets, but these folks are out there.
Next question, Fred here in the front. Can we get a microphone down here, please?
Thank you. Hello, Paul. It's good to see you. My name is Frederick Fillon. I'm from Paris, and I'm the publisher of the Monday
Hello.
Note, among other things. I have a question regarding your partners. How do you guarantee the integrity of what you're producing and what you are handling to your partners? Did you issue some guidelines in order, again, to preserve what you are producing in order to have your content treated in a proper way? And do you have some right to actually see what your content will become at last? Thank you.
Very good question. First of all, on the side of ProPublica, as many of you know, our donors understand that they have no role in deciding what stories we do or how we do them. In fact, they don't even know what stories we're working on until they appear. We welcome them. They're giving us story ideas, but only passed on to either me or the managing editor, not to talk to the reporters directly. In terms of dealing with partners, we offer them the opportunity to know our sources. We ask that they keep those at the level of editors, not at reporters, because we don't want their reporters yelling at our sources saying, why didn't they give them the story instead of us? But we also, when they legally vet a story, we also let the lawyers question our reporters and editors the same as our own lawyers would question them. So they have a chance to vet a story and be confident that it meets their standards. When we make our stories available to partners, we typically make it available under Creative Commons, which means that they get to publish it for free, but in full and unchanged. Now, when we work directly pre-publication with a specific single partner, we can discuss the editing of the story and what the final version will say, but we always have the option, if we can't agree on what the final version of the story will say, to pull it back and not give it to that partner.
Thank you. And time just for one more question.
Okay, this is Samah Abdallah. I'm the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Al-Ahram, the Egyptian newspaper. You spoke about donors just minutes ago. If you could elaborate more, what kind of donors do you have and what are their business or interest? Secondly, I would like to get an idea about the working flow. I mean, who decides what kind of stories you are going to work on and get information? And what if a newspaper or one of your partners, as you call them, asks you to get certain information regarding certain topic or whatever? I mean, would it work this way, or you decide what kind of stories you collect the information and then you pass it to them? Thank you very much.
Two very good questions. I'll try to go quickly in answering them. In deciding what we do, we're very bottom up. I believe that the best ideas, certainly for investigative projects, tend to come from reporters. And so what happens is we have reporters, they're in the field, they're looking for information. When they think they're coming upon something that can be a story, they share that with their direct editors, who will help guide them in prioritizing between one reporting line and another. If a reporter is going to invest significant time in a story, then it will come up to the managing editor, Steve Engelberg, and me, and we'll get involved in that allocation of resources. You asked, will we sometimes respond to ideas from other news organizations? Absolutely. The vast majority of what we do is self-generated, it's generated by us, but we've had some very major projects suggested by partners and potential partners who we then collaborated with. So we don't believe that we have a monopoly on all the best ideas. You asked about donors. The donors so far in several categories. Our most important donors are there at the launch are Herb and Marion Sandler, very wealthy philanthropists who live in the San Francisco Bay Area. They provided the money we needed, almost all of it, to get started. But once we demonstrated the success of our journalistic model, we've begun diversifying our funding, and the funders include major foundations. You know, some of the names, Knight, MacArthur, Ford, Pew, Atlantic, Carnegie, Hewlett. There are others, but those come most quickly to mind. Gates is another one. Then some wealthy individuals who may give us anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000 a year, and then smaller donations that range from $25 to $25,000, and the number of those is growing very, very rapidly. So it's a mixture, and we also have earned income. We this past January, for the first time, our website was large enough to take advertising, and so we've begun taking advertising, and we're looking at the possibilities of doing syndication deals. But for the immediate future, at least, we will depend for well over half our resources on donors of various sizes.
Paul, I think we've got time for one more question. One quick question and one quick answer, please.
Okay.
This is Janina Segnini from La Nación.
I can't hear.
Oh, yeah, you're on. Go.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear now.
Hi, this is Janina Segnini from La Nación, Costa Rica. I was wondering, well, you kind of answered my question now, but if you had no donors, can you imagine any sustainable commercial model to do this kind of journalism on a regular basis? And also, this is working very well for the US market, but many of us come from different backgrounds, and maybe we have no philanthropists as much as you have. So do you have any idea of how can journalists around the world could develop this sort of journalism, but in a sustainable way?
I don't think it is feasible at present for there to be a commercial version of what we do, which is to concentrate on doing nothing but investigative reporting. It is possible that a vertically integrated news organization can have investigative reporting as part of its menu of reporting that it provides to a broad-based audience, but it cannot do as much as it could do in the 41 years that I was in print journalism at the LA Times and the Wall Street Journal. Why? Because the industry has gone from a high-profit, high-margin, quasi-monopolistic business model to one that has much tighter margins, much flatter revenues, and is therefore much less able to take the risk of sending reporters out for months at a time on a project that might not produce a viable story. So that it's still done, it's still possible to do it, but not to the extent that it was done in the past. You asked about possibility outside the United States, and I agree that there's a greater tradition of large-scale philanthropy in the U.S., but as I've traveled around Europe, for example, I found great interest in our model and some efforts to start it in Italy, in the UK, in Germany, and some other countries. So it's I don't think it's impossible at all to make it happen in places outside the U.S., but it will, just as it does in the U.S., require energy and ingenuity.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. That's terrific. Thanks for that fascinating and inspiring contribution. Thank you. And on that, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And if you're able to stay with us just for an extra moment, on that very question of encouraging data journalism elsewhere around the world, we have a little announcement to make, which GEN and Google have been working on in recent weeks. So we're able to announce that today we're launching a global data journalism prize, Google and GEN in concert. And I think that there are pieces of paper which have been distributed around the room which give you details of that. Bertrand, would you like to say a word?
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul, very much for this contribution.